All right. Good afternoon from El Limbo de Peñas Blancas, Costa Rica. I'm Amanda.
Hi, I'm Roger.
And this week's topic is the mechanistic view of the world. And so we wanted to give you a little summary of our ideas, our understanding of this, to help you understand the reading. We took a chapter from Capra's book called The Turning Point that's going to address these ideas in more detail. So, our ideas about the mechanistic view of the world is a world that is fragmented. It's a world that is categorized, isolated. It's a world that comes from physics, from science. The two major names that come up in physics are Descartes and also Isaac Newton. And what happened with those two scientists is that they were taking ideas, simplifying them, putting them into equations and formulas, and coming up with solutions. And so science at this time was saying, look, everything has its place, and everything has a solution. The world is reasonable, the world is something that can be calculated, and that's the way life is. So we would like to take this idea, this view, this paradigm, and think about it and how it reflects today. So I'm gonna turn it over to Roger, who's gonna give us maybe some of his ideas.
Thank you, Amanda. And so the mechanistic view was a way in which people, mainly in the science world, would try to understand the world. So it was a way of understanding how our organs work, how cells work, how machines work, how nature works. So we're not saying that it is a bad way of seeing the world or a bad way of understanding the world. It was the way in which people at the beginning, with the beginning of science and the industrial movement, a model for seeing and understanding the world. So the big question now is it possible to see and understand everything that we do, the ways in which we interact, the things that we study, with the same model? The model of understanding things in a mechanistic, fragmented, reductionist kind of way. So that's where we're at right now in this book that Amanda mentioned, The Turning Point by Capra. His big question is, okay, so far when science and the model was this mechanistic view, and since it was one of the new, and it was a revolution, the way they would see things back then in that way, it started like that. And one of the big questions now is, how many of the things that we're doing nowadays, including education, including understanding everything in the world, how much of that is still viewed through the same lens of a reductionist, mechanistic, simplified way of seeing things? So that's where at this point, and lots of what you'll be reading in the chapter, it's by Capra, right, is trying to see how much of that will apply to other fields and other aspects of the world and things that we're trying to understand. So, for instance, in our world of education, it's interesting to see how many things, even though it's 2015, and there are lots of things that we're doing differently, and we're using different approaches and different paradigms, but still nowadays it's interesting to see how much of what we do is still done through the lens of a mechanistic view of the world. And one thing that I like thinking about is lesson planning. And I understand how, as a teacher, when I first started teaching, it was so important and helpful for me to plan using a very structured kind of grid where everything had its box, everything had its place. And it was helpful because it got me thinking, it got me going. Nowadays, I feel oftentimes there are things that don't fit in my lesson plan the way it's traditionally done. There are things that doesn't fit under a column, things that don't fit necessarily in a box. And that's just one little example of how, in our world of education, of teaching language even more specifically, there's still some things that are done in a very reductionist kind of way. So that's one example of it. And our encouragement for you is, what other things are there in your world of education, in your different roles as teachers, supervisors, administrators, learners? What are there other things that you notice and you can think about that are also done in a very mechanistic kind of way? And how does that affect or not affect what we do? And ultimately, the purpose of learning. How does it affect? How does it not affect? We don't want to be like biased on this, but we want you to. That's what we want to think about this week.
Mm-hmm. So again, little overview. The mechanistic view of the world. One of the main places that it comes from is science. Think about all of the equations that you learned when you were in chemistry and physics, and how everything has a place and there's reason behind things. That we look at things in isolation. Do you remember the mitochondria from biology? We're zooming in and seeing things in isolation. And so we'd like for you guys to think about, where does this fit in your world right now? Because it is a part of our world. It's such, it's like the backdrop of our world. And so where do you see it in your world? Where do you see it in teaching? Where are you seeing it with your plans, with your students, in your positions, at your jobs? How is this contributing to learning, or how is this hindering learning? So those are our questions. The Capra chapter gives you a lot more detail. And
much fancier words.
Much fancier words. We thought we would give you like the version. So what we want you to do with the Capra chapter is to read it and to pick out the main ideas of what where the mechanistic view of the world came from, especially in terms of science. And what does that mean for today? How has it shaped our world?
And feel free to skim and scan it, and maybe stop, I don't know, 3-4 times where you feel like you'd like to read in greater detail, because it is about maybe 30-40 pages. So feel free to do some skimming and scanning, and also stop in and read in detail wherever you feel like something is really, I don't know, calling you in.
And we know that you might not have studied chemistry or physics in a while, so we're not expecting you to understand all of the chemistry and physics terminology, all the science terminology. We're just looking for what's the essence of the mechanistic view. That's it.
Well, thanks for listening to us. This was Roger and Amanda and Roger and our, what was it, coffee?
This is coffee time.
Coffee time.
Talk. Bye-bye.
See you soon.